I like turning the videos to watch and audio to listen to on my laptop or on my phone. I also like to play games on my phone, such as Homescapes and Project Makeover. I may even tend to stress eat. My counselor concluded I turned to entertainment because of my anxiety. That's probably the same reason why I stress eat. Anxiety can be featured in Asperger syndrome like what I have, but I don't think you have to have Asperger syndrome or even depression to have anxiety. What triggers someone's anxiety varies depending on the person. For instance, I concern over the quality of my schoolwork and if I deserve the good or passing grades I receive. The thought of being judged or criticized, I have a very mean inner critic. And certain germs and grease stains spreading. Ugh, I don't like that. I'm not the most social human being either. I may hesitate in contacting or even approaching other people, even though I'm not a total recluse. I also have work anxieties, especially when I'm starting a new job. Even searching for a job is challenging for me. Something else that triggers my anxiety is filing for money-related things such as taxes or college grants. It's also emotionally challenging for me to tackle programs such as Google Ads or other programs that I'm not that used to. Long lists of tasks are no picnic for me either. With troubles such as anxiety, it's not easy to focus on schoolwork nor to participate in certain social situations. Don't get me wrong, I still do schoolwork and I have searched for jobs. It's just more difficult for me, and I constantly need breaks from the important things I have to do in life. If you have anxiety, you're not alone. Not only does it vary what triggers other people's anxiety, but it also varies what the people do, like how it varies what other people do.
Something that I usually feel anxious about is my friends and them not liking me. So like when I hang out, I get worried about things that I say and like I overthink what I say, and I get really anxious about that. There are definitely specific things that overwhelm me. Sometimes in like stressful situations, I do fine, but in less stressful situations, when I take a minute, I tend to overthink things, and that's when I get the most anxious. I actually do really well in social situations. It's when I remove myself from those situations and like think about the things I said. And I tend to have like more anxiety when it comes to overthinking. So when I'm like with my friends and in the moment, I do fine. But when I remove myself from that moment, it's when I get anxious. So something I really like to do is read. But besides that, I really like to talk to my roommates and to my friends and to my parents because I'm a very vocal thinker. So when I get to talk out loud, when I get to think things out loud, it really helps me to like get rid of that anxiety. And I also really like to lay on the floor. I don't know why, it's very grounding. It just kind of like helps me calm down.
For me, I feel the most anxious around dilemmas that concern personal morality and also concerning scholastic endeavors such as turning in school assignments on time or being prepared for an upcoming exam. I've dealt with anxiety since I was, well, really for my entire life, but I guess it really made itself manifest when I was in middle school. So this has definitely not been, it has definitely not been solely a part of my college experience. It has been a part of my life since I can remember. When I'm given a specific assignment that is particularly challenging or there is an upcoming exam, that's when my anxiety starts to kind of reveal itself a little more, and I get a little more like the symptoms of my clinical anxiety start to show. Like I get a little fidgety, and I start to like talk to myself a little more, and my roommates start to notice that. If I found a book that I like, I just read for probably about like an hour. Depends on how good the book is. Or I would probably call a family member if it was convenient. I've also been known to just watch TV if I have time. And this is all granted that I have time to spare and I'm not working on homework or currently on another assignment, whether it be ministering or out and about doing my job.
So the things that I feel anxious about is being surrounded in a large group of people that I don't know. Also, when I'm new to something and I'm expected to learn in a really fast pace, I tend to get really overwhelmed about it and start to second guess if I, my worth and if I can, actually do it. I guess it's just more about meeting new people. I'm very scared what they think of me when they first meet me, whether or not, if I guess I tend to compare my looks to that person's looks as well. So something like that. Mm-hmm. Even before I was in college, I was going through these things. Like I said, I do feel anxious when I'm in a large group of people, and that can happen outside of school. It can happen at work. It can even happen at your own house. Last semester, definitely. I was taking 6 classes, and they were all 3 to 4 credit classes, and so it was just overwhelming having so much homework pile up and just second guessing myself if I can even do this, if I should even be in school. What would my parents think if I don't pass my classes? So something I like to do is just take a step back, take a small break from the stressors that I have in my life. And so I like to watch anime. So I would go on my laptop and go on Funimation and just watch my anime for maybe 30, maybe to an hour max. Something else I like to do is, it's gonna sound weird, but I like going to work. It's just taking a break from homework and just school, maybe even personal issues that are going on. So just just stepping back from those things. Mm-hmm.
I feel anxious about a lot of things. First thing that comes to my mind is dating. I think the second thing also would be finance, grades, job opportunities. With dating, there's so much to think about. And I think the sheer amount of stuff that goes on when you're trying to form a relationship with somebody, I think that's what intimidates me the most. Not knowing what to do, I guess. That's also a part of it. And I think I've had some bad philosophical outlooks on it, and so that's probably caused more harm than good. I think with finance, there's a lot of uncertainty. Right now, I'm a college student, so I'm not exactly salaried or anything like that, so I'm not guaranteed, $3,000 a month or anything like that. I'm living off of $250 every 2 weeks. So that's just a little bit of anxiety for me, is just making sure that that what I have to my name stays over a certain point, so that I have a barrier, a buffer. That guy Dave Ramsey, he said that your emergency fund should be about $1,000. I've lived by that and some of his other principles that he's talked about. And then with grades, my grades are super important to me. They're a direct measurement to me of how I'm handling life. It just shows that I'm doing my best and I'm not sloughing off my work. I care very deeply about the way that I work and the way that I conduct myself in my classes, and so I strive super hard to show that I'm putting my best effort forward, even though I acknowledge that I do make mistakes. It's okay. The big thing that I do is I play hockey. I picked it up as a kid, and it's become my adult sport, as it were. I had picked it up. I had experienced it just playing it in PE a couple of times, but it wasn't until I got here on campus that I had really started to appreciate it more. I run the floor hockey group here on campus when COVID isn't being mean, and it was an awesome experience to be able to meet new people. Some of my most dearest friends come from that group.
It's true that people get anxious over certain things, but anxiety is constant worrying and probably even panic. The freshman year of college is probably the most challenging thing in a person's life. True, each year of college does have its own challenges. However, the freshman year and the senior year are probably the most challenging and possibly the scariest. Freshmen, they're new to college. They have to get used to the schoolwork, the people living there, the expenses, even the environment. Seniors, on the other hand, they're met with the most advanced classes that the college offers in their major. Also, seniors concern over applying for graduation and getting their graduation times set up. They also wonder, or at least some may also wonder, what am I going to do after I finish college? If you're like me, you wonder if an internship will go well.
So anxiety kind of causes this fight or flight response to occur where the body is preparing to face an intense situation. Your body will start pumping out chemicals and hormones. They'll get your heart pumping and oxygen flowing, basically trying to prepare to either fight or flee a situation. And this is a normal response, and it's important to keep us safe. But with someone who struggles with anxiety, this fight or flight response is often overused. So meaning the stress of the event when compared to the body's response to that stress is somewhat disproportionate. Some examples might be like if a student is walking into a crowded room. If someone has anxiety, that would be an anxiety-inducing situation in some cases, or sitting down to take a test, or even just asking a roommate for a favor can cause this anxiety response when maybe that wasn't an appropriate response for your body to want to go into that fight or flight response. So for students, anxiety can cause all sorts of problems with sleep, with focus, even mood fluctuations, and so much more. So all of these things that are affected by anxiety impact the ability for a student to function in school. So basically, anxiety can be quite detrimental to students in college, to their success really, if not handled properly. Students are faced with a ton of stress. I'm sure any student on campus can tell you that they are stressed out. And simply moving away from home and being thrown into a new environment with new people and a lot of responsibility is enough to cause plenty of stress. And stress is normal, especially in college, but for many, the frequency and intensity of stress in college may lead to anxiety. A common problem I see with students is that they get into this anxiety snowball effect, basically, where the work a student is facing is causing anxiety. So they respond to that anxiety with some sort of relaxation technique that may distract and disturb their schedule, which in turn causes them to struggle even more in school, which leads to more stress. So this is a very vicious cycle, which is unfortunately quite common. Anxiety is something that can come up in any portion of your life. There are plenty of stress-inducing situations that someone can have anxiety about or be anxious about. It just so happens that students in college are faced with a lot of stress, but even just the stress of being an adult, living out in the world, having to get a job and face the daily tasks of living can be anxiety inducing. College can be really difficult because it is a transition year. Moving from K-12 education to college is quite a leap. And for many students, that transition is difficult. And anxiety and being faced with a lot of new situations makes anxiety even worse, basically. So things like having to do all of your coursework by yourself and make sure that you're on a good schedule, good sleep schedule, getting all of your work done and doing all the tasks of daily living are suddenly all your responsibility, when before maybe in high school you had teachers that supported you, maybe your parents helped you a lot, and suddenly those sources are less available to you. You have a lot more responsibility placed on your shoulders suddenly. So I definitely have seen a lot of students come into college and have that anxiety be worsened because of those transitions associated with moving to college.
Generally speaking, anxiety is going to be a response to a perceived stress. So when you talk about and ask the impact of what might be most freshman or sophomore, junior, or senior, the question is going to be, well, all of those offer their own unique particular type of stress. So if you consider the brand new student, the newness, the novelty of college experience, like how to get into their classes, finding where their classes are, learning how to study. I mean, just that whole orientation to not knowing how to properly budget your time, schedule, and be successful. A lot of that newness can just be very overwhelming and stressful and anxiety inducing. Well, that kind of thing that is stressful for that student may no longer be stressful for a senior level student because they already know how to navigate class. They've already learned their strategies for success, and they've adopted good study skills that they're confident in that help them to do well. So they don't stress out about that as much anymore. But their stresses might be considering, well, I'm about to graduate, and what about next steps like a job? You know, what if a student is trying to apply for and get a job while they're also trying to keep classes? So I wouldn't say, and what I feel fairly comfortable telling you is that I wouldn't say that freshmen or seniors necessarily have more or less anxiety than the other, but the things that are going to induce that stress and an anxiety response are going to be different. And both groups of students and everywhere in between, right, juniors and sophomores, are going to have and experiencing high levels of stress. For students at any level or any year you're in for college, midterms and finals are a high stress and anxiety inducing kind of period for everybody. So the most college students throughout their course of college are going to find peaks and troughs of times when there's stress is high and it goes down a little bit low, and associated kind of feelings of anxiety high and feelings of anxiety low. I would say routinely finals time was always the most stressful time for me. I wouldn't say there was one particular year that was more stressful. Actually, that's not true. I would say probably the most stressful year of college, where maybe I had, and I'm trying to think if anxiety is the right word. If I'm trying to tie in when I might feel the most anxious about my experiences and most anxiety in response to stress that I experienced in college, then it would have been in graduate school. So yeah, in my final year of graduate school, when the consequences and the results of my education were coming to a head of career and job placement, that I would say was very anxiety inducing. Making sure you're very careful to separate out feeling anxiety, being anxious, as a result of stress or otherwise, and having anxiety disorders. Those two things are not the same thing. Someone who struggles from and experiences an anxiety disorder, the reasons for that and the level of emotion that they feel in response to that is not necessarily the same as somebody who's just feeling anxious or having some feelings of anxiety as response to stress. So make sure that you're mindful of that. I mean, having an anxiety disorder is a clinically diagnosable disorder where the anxiety comes, frankly, most directly, that is kind of illogical, meaning it lasts longer and is focused on things that most people typically don't experience. So an anxiety disorder is not the same thing as feeling anxious. I get feelings of anxiety, especially when it's, I mean, have somebody ask me to speak in church. And not only is that stressful, but that gives me symptoms of a little bit of anxiety, butterflies in my stomach, unsettling, things like that. And that's a normal response to a situation where maybe I'm not the most comfortable in. So anxiety is a normal response. Everybody is coded neurologically and biologically to feel anxiety. And so that's a normal response to stress, and that's okay. But that is very different than somebody who experiences that in a way that is completely out of control and unmanageable, and in response to things that it's heightened in a way that it likely shouldn't be, or at least it isn't for most everybody else. A student can very reasonably get very overwhelmed at finals time, and usually for good reason, because there's a lot going on. There's a lot on your plate. There's a lot happening for school, a lot of classes, worry and concern over doing well in the class because maybe this last test is going to impact substantially your final grade in the class. And that is a very reasonable thing to feel stressed out about. And that would be totally normal to feel some anxiety over that situation. But that doesn't mean somebody has an anxiety disorder. That is typically somebody who is responding normally and appropriately to a high stress situation, moving towards that distinction between disorder and a response to an environmental stimulus. Environmental stimulus means like an exam you having come up, having to speak in church, or take on a new calling, or starting a brand new job, or having troubles with your, in your family, loss in the family, or troubles and heartache, or challenges that you see from a sibling or a loved one, or even a roommate. I mean, if you have a roommate who makes life hard for you, that can have a little bit of anxiety, especially if you don't get along with that roommate, for example. That might make you feel anxious. But if you're saying always, meaning like you consistently feel anxiety and it will not go away, even in periods where there's no reason to feel it because there is no active or real threat, or even a very real stressor that is being put on you, but you just feel it. That kind of irrational or illogical, or you can't connect it to something type of feeling of anxiety that just won't go away. Now you're moving more towards what I'm talking about with that clinical diagnosis of what anxiety may be. Because an anxiety disorder where it just will not go away may be a particular disorder, that may be a problem that you might not be able to control, and it might be a manifestation of your mind, your cognition, your body responding inappropriately, or it not being able to regulate itself in response to information.
Please note, taking breaks is not necessarily a sign of laziness. The person could be struggling with anxiety, depression, and/or something else. Before you judge someone, think about it. It's possible that there's something important to know about what that person is going through. Traumatic experiences and what-ifs can be discouraging. Also, it is normally scary to try or start new things. And of course, the COVID-19 pandemic of 2020 hasn't made life easier for people either.
Something I would say is just take time to feel in tune with your feelings, because I think it's hard to get caught up in the everyday movement and routine of college, and I think it's hard to kind of take a minute and realize, okay, I just need to take a minute and breathe, take a minute to be by myself. So I think just being in tune with your feelings and what's going on is really important.
When we're given an assignment, or in general, when your boss gives you a job to do, or when you're trying to do the best you can in whatever you're doing. The best you can do is the best you can do. And more often than not, that would be enough. And when it's not, and even if it's not enough, you will always have that satisfaction that you did the best you can do, and that's all you can do. And sometimes it's hard to remember that, but when we do, I mean, no one's perfect, and I guess sometimes it's harder to remember that you're not. It's harder to remember that it's okay that you're not perfect than it is to try to overcome the anxiety itself.
Don't be ashamed to take breaks. It's something that I recommend 100%. It's very much needed. Last week, I was actually in Utah just to take a break from the things that are going on here at school and in my personal life, and it was very much needed, and I feel refreshed. So that's something I recommend.
For a couple of reasons, I think it's important to remember that when we're moved to anxiety or when we're moved to fear, sometimes it's honestly a motivator. I don't think, I don't know, I've always liked the phrase, putting the fear of God into somebody. But if you just separate that into something else, you just have fear of God, right? If you fear God, then you'll do what he asks, right? You'll keep his commandments, you will love him and serve him, but you're not necessarily afraid of him, are you? You care about what his standards are, you care about how you conduct yourself, and you try to give him your best. But the best part of all that is that when you are actually consciously trying to do your best, he acknowledges it and he knows. Because his best is kind of impossible to reach at this point. So giving your best effort relieves a lot of anxiety in me, at least, and I think it can do a lot for many more people. So Marvin J. Ashton was a 70 and an apostle once upon a time, forever ago. And he gave a talk about self-management. And this is what he said about one aspect of self-esteem. One of life's eternal pursuits is learning to know oneself. Dr. Thomas Harris shares this worthy thought with us. Remember this. Most people never fulfill their human promise and potential because they remain perpetually helpless children overwhelmed by a sense of inferiority. The feeling of being okay does not imply that the person has risen above all his faults and emotional problems. It merely implies that he refuses to be paralyzed by them. He is determined to accept himself as he is, but also to assume more and more control of his life. That statement, to me, just sums up my approach to anxiety and some of the qualities that have really troubled me over the years. It's important for us to be able to live with ourselves. I don't know, I can't stress enough the fact that we each need to be aware of our weaknesses, but we don't need to hyper-focus on the weaknesses. It's easy to do. It's easy to assume that we are nothing and that we're inferior, but that's just not true. He called it a sense of inferiority for a reason, because most times the sense of inferiority is not true. It's not real.
The first thing I think it's important for students with anxiety to realize they are not alone. There are so many students in the same boat, experiencing the same emotions and the same frustration. And so I think finding a support system is really important. Finding other students who feel the way you do and can support you through that. Then I also think that it's a good idea to question your fears sometimes. It might not work for all people, but I've seen a lot of students who, if they take the time and ask themselves, is the severity of the situation being distorted by my negative thoughts? And then if you feel like that is the case, challenging those fears allows you to take back some of that control. Now, this won't work for everyone, but I think it's a good idea to just start thinking through, is my response to this event appropriate, or am I taking this out of proportion? And then another thing that I think is really important, not just to students with anxiety, but just to everyone, is practicing self-care. Because oftentimes we forget to take care of ourselves. And when we don't take care of ourselves properly, our mental health takes a toll. So it's really important to take time to yourself, whether it's 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, whatever is necessary to connect with yourself and have that positive self-affirmation, basically. And that could be really, really helpful to your mental health and therefore your anxiety. And then the last thing I say is if all else fails, if you're feeling overwhelmed by anxiety, you can't control it, and it's making it so you can't accomplish what you need to in a day, is seek out help. There's plenty of help out there. Like here at BYU-Idaho, there's the counseling center with counselors who are willing and able to help you with anxiety. So using those resources is really important as well, especially if you feel like you can't handle on your own. So basically, to recap, the things I would suggest are remembering you're not alone, you've got a support system, questioning your fears, making sure you're taking back some control if possible, practicing self-care, and seeking out help if you need that additional help if you can't handle it on your own.
One thing that's really important, I think, generally speaking, is that you understand the limits of your capabilities. A little bit of stress and a little bit of anxiety is normal and sometimes can be really good, because if you didn't care about the result of what you were doing, then you might not feel anxious. So caring about what is going to happen usually will lead to feeling a little bit anxious or a little bit of anxiety with that. And that's okay. But where it gets out of control and out of hand is when you put on yourself burdens of responsibilities that are well above your level to really respond to that. And so where students, I would say, one way to manage it is be very realistic about how much time you have to do things and how much time you need to be successful in those things. Some students can work very, very quickly on things and they can take on a little bit more because they're a little bit faster. Some students are a little bit slower and they take a little bit more time, and so maybe they shouldn't take on so much stuff. Or some students maybe have a very high level of expectation of themselves that they have to get a 4.0 in everything. And that expectation may be a result of anxiety. So one thing that students might do is to maybe evaluate periodically their expectations. What do they expect to accomplish with what they're doing? What kind of pressure do they put on themselves? And maybe ask themselves, why do they have that pressure and whether or not that pressure is necessary? And maybe think about what they can do to minimize some of that pressure. So could a student maybe take one less class in a semester to maybe reduce some of that? That might be helpful. And it's also important to take care of yourself physically. Sleep well, eat well, and try to do a little bit of getting out and exercising. It sounds oversimplified, but diet, sleep, and exercise are three critical components that can really help with emotional regulation. And a lot of students find when they get high level of negative emotion, it's not uncommon that you would expect to see that one of those three or a couple of those three things are really threatened: diet, sleep, and exercise. A lot of times students feel the most high emotion, it's really hard to control. A lot of times they're not sleeping very well and they're not doing very much to be very active. Or they might even be all three. They're eating kind of cruddy, they're not sleeping very well, and they're not doing anything physically to take care of themselves. So there's a really strong connection to the way you're treating your body and the way that you feel and how well you can respond to the way that you feel. So a big piece of advice would be to try to make sure that you give yourself enough time so that you can actually take care of yourself properly, so that you have the strength to respond to the situations that you take on. And try not to take on too much.
Having people to talk to about your struggles and who won't judge you is a blessing. I'd encourage you to seek out those kind of people you're comfortable talking to about your struggles. Anxiety is not uncommon. You're not alone in your worries and possible panic attacks.